Hi, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. I'm your host, Becca. I'm a certified personal trainer, holistic health coach, and future chiropractor on my way to figuring out this thing we called life. Now, let's get babbling. And welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. This week, I wanted to release a bonus episode. I know I typically release a podcast every other week, but I was too excited to release this episode because, of course, I'm talking about books. If you remember at the beginning of 2025, I started this challenge for myself and then others if they wanted to join along called hashtag Becca Babble Reads. And my goal for that was to just get back into reading and read 13 books. Just 13 books. I think I actually said on the podcast 12, but for some reason my Google Reads, I've never heard of that before. Um, my Goodreads had said 13 books. So I don't know if I was supposed to say 13 on the podcast, but if my Goodreads says 13, I'm going to go with 13. But it doesn't really matter because I went over and beyond that goal and I somehow read 21 books, which is crazy for me. I remember in elementary school there being like reading challenges, and I think it was to read 20 books within that school year, and it was like grinding for me to like actually get those 20 books read, and I did that with ease this year, which was awesome. I may have actually read 22, and I might have not kept track of one, but I don't know because I'm pretty sure I read the book, the one about Haymitch in the Hunger Games series. I'm blanking on the name of the actual book, but for some reason it's not logged in my Goodreads. And you have that, like, if you've ever had that like moment where you're like, did I actually do the thing or did I dream of myself doing the thing? So 21, 22, we'll see. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just excited that I like actually met that goal. And what's interesting is like how it actually changed my mindset, my health, and honestly, like the way that I had my lookout on every day had changed when I started reading more. And this helped me a lot in clinic or just in chiropractic school in general because it allowed me to have this like separation with school. So I'm going to go into a little bit of that later, but I wanted to dive into like which books were my favorite, but I'm going to make it a little bit more fun and put it based on like fun categories. So instead of just going through a list where you're just like, eh, I don't really have much context to this book besides the summary you give me. I'm going to put it in more specific categories if you are more into one type of book versus the other. But I wanted to give more context into why I started the challenge. So, also heads up, I just realized that I forgot to say this. I will be doing no spoilers and I will not be doing star ratings. I am terrible at doing star ratings for books. I pretty much just give 4 out of 5 stars every single time. And if it's super crazy and really grabs my attention, it's a 5 out of 5 star. I almost feel too bad giving a 2-star or a 1-star or 3-star. So I typically always give a 4-star. So that doesn't really help any of you guys. But you may be able to rate my star rating based on how excited I sound when I talk about the book. So I'll leave that up to you. And I'm a big person into not getting spoiled about books and movies and TV shows and stuff like that. So I will make sure that I do not spoil any books for you guys in this podcast. So do not be afraid and be like, should I be listening to these next couple of sentences of this podcast? So back into why I actually started doing this. So I started the hashtag Becca Babble Reads challenge because I wanted to be less on screens. Granted, I was reading on my Kindle a lot, which is technically a screen, but it's just a little bit different and like separates you from like having that temptation of going on Instagram or reading your emails and doing all the things you probably shouldn't be doing right before bed or just in between classes. I also wanted to find a little bit of like a good escape or separation from school. I have a really hard time of like turning off my brain or not like thinking about 5 million things at one time. And this allowed me to actually solely focus and like calm my body down. I have a really hard time still doing like meditation and not having something in my ear, but when I'm reading, it's something I'm physically actually doing and thinking about. I was actually thinking about this the last night when I was reading, and I had noticed the more that I've read, the more my creativity has boosted, which is kind of crazy, but it makes sense. Like when I was younger and I used to read, it was like I was just reading words off a page and that was it. And I couldn't really remember what was going on, or I never really understood why people loved reading so much. But as I've read more, specifically fiction books, like I'm starting to create pictures in my head of like what is happening, and now it makes sense of to why people love reading fiction books, because you're basically creating your own movie in your head. And it was because I actually allowed myself to slow down and enjoy the book. There's like a good and a bad with letting myself have a goal of reading 13 books or like going after that. Was you have this like rushed feeling of like I have to read 13 books, so I better get through this book fast enough. But when I let go of that and was just like, my goal is to get 13 books by the end of the year, but the habits that I slowly started to create, like reading before bed, reading in between patients that I had and I didn't have any other homework that I had to do, or maybe I was waiting on a friend or something, and instead of scrolling through Instagram, I was reading a fun book and not obsessed about what else is going on in the world or whatever he says she said is doing. I was able to create my own world and like create this own happiness and escape that was exciting and also helped with my own imagination. And that all started with having a goal of 13 books, but creating the habits that allowed me to get there and not so worried about getting to the 13 books. And I actually did it, and I did it way over and beyond. Now, some people may be like, it doesn't count because you did audiobooks. I did do audiobooks, but I'm like, it's still a story. I still read it. I still got the context. I did a mix of audiobooks and reading because, again, I wanted this to become a habit and less stress on me and something that I would actually enjoy. And if it was just, hey, I'm reading 13 books and I'm only allowed to read and that's it, then I don't think I would have been able to read 13 books and actually enjoyed it. So I included the audiobooks also because I am a big podcast person. I listen to a ton of entrepreneurial podcasts, chiropractic podcasts, and health and fitness podcasts, which is great. And I love learning and I love exploring and um, learning about my body in different ways. But there's almost this feeling of like too much information overload and feeling like I wasn't doing enough, that when I stopped listening to the podcast, like when I started reading a specific series, which I'll get into later, it allowed myself to just like breathe a bit because I was so obsessed with this series that I stopped listening to all of my podcasts. And I had thought about it. I was like, I haven't listened to a podcast in so long. And I'm not saying that like learning is bad, because I would never say it's bad or that it's too much. But the pressure that I put on myself with school, listening to the podcast, and then like what that podcaster said that I need to be doing, there was just this like underlying stress that when I stopped listening to it and I just enjoyed listening to the podcast, or sorry, listening to the audiobook of the series and then going to school and learning, I actually had the brain power because I let myself rest and because I let myself have fun and use my imagination and get excited about these different stories. So, using audiobooks was actually really beneficial for me, not only because it allowed me to go after this goal and have ease with it, but also because it gave me separation that I didn't realize that I needed to have. So if you're that kind of person who like binges podcasts all the time, they tend to be like learning, health and fitness, entrepreneur, stuff like that. Maybe take a break from a little bit. Obviously not a break from mine because mine are great and mine are fun. But deep down, like ask yourself like, hey, if I took a break from this, what would this look like? How would this free up my life? Would this give me more brain space that I could be either A, doing something else with, or just like actually being able to think about your own thoughts? Include audiobooks is my whole thing there. I did keep track of this on my Goodreads. You can follow me on Goodreads. I think it just comes up as Rebecca. This was before I was being called Becca. So follow me there. I'll make sure to put it in the podcast description and you can see how many books I read next year, which I am still planning on doing the challenge. So if you want to join, I'll talk about it more at the end of the podcast. But now is for the most important part where I basically break down all the books that I read and which ones were the best out of each category. So I've got a few different categories. My first one, which is probably going to be my favorite one, is the category of escaping into epic worlds. And if you've been following me on Instagram for a while, you know that I started the Throne of Glass series. Yes, I know I am very, very late. I'm late to the party. I read A Court of Thrones and Roses, or ACOTAR, however you say it, or whatever your preference is. I read that like a long time ago before it was like super popular, but I never read Throne of Glass. My friend who told me to read ACOTAR told me also to read Throne of Glass and thought I would love Throne of Glass more than ACOTAR, and she was totally right, but I didn't listen. And I actually had one of my professors tell me, "Oh, you need to read this." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But I was so overwhelmed with how big the series was that I was like, I don't know if I can commit to this now in chiropractic school. And then, of course, I got the Libby app. So basically, I can listen to audiobooks or read books through my Kindle, through the library, through this app. And I was like, you know what? Let's like put it on hold because it's probably going to be on hold forever and I probably won't get it until I graduate. And then they started putting out this thing where you can skip the line, which I have no idea what that means. But I just knew I got the audiobook early, like really, really early. And I was like, sure, why not? And it was, you only got it for, I think, a week instead of 2 weeks. And I was like, I'll just see if I like it and whatever. So I completely broke the rule that I told myself I was going to. And then I became obsessed with Throne of Glass. Like, I binged that thing in 3 days. I went on so many walks. I was like, I have to know more, more. So currently I am reading Queen of Shadows. So that is not on the list right now. So right now I just have Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Hair of Fire, and Assassin's Blade is what I've read and will be in this category. If you don't know about the Throne of Glass series and what that book is about, basically it's about this girl where she grows up and she is an assassin, and she grows up into this assassin, I guess you could call it a clan, or just a group, and she ends up in the king's prison, and the prince comes in and is like, hey, I want you to try and become the king's champion and be in this competition. So it's kind of like gives you Hunger Games and Divergent vibes with like assassin, I guess is the best way that I could explain it. And so basically she goes through all these trials, and then on the background there's like this rebelry that is starting to like build up that she doesn't know a ton about, and she's just like trying to survive. And so there's a lot of twists and turns, and there's like cutesy love. So there's not like, I wouldn't say on the spicy scale, um I would say maybe a 1 or a 2, but so it's not like, if that's something that you either really like or don't like, that's something you can be aware of, which I honestly kind of appreciate because I like the building of like the feelings and the like the like, oh, she said that. Like that is my kind of like spice sort of book. So I really enjoyed that with The Throne of Glass. There's a lot of descriptive detail, and if you like ACOTAR but you wanted more of that like action and the thoughts of the character, and almost she's so sarcastic, the main character, you're gonna love the Throne of Glass series. So that's a little background into the Throne of Glass series. And Assassin's Blade is the prequel, and so there's a ton of debate online on when you should read it and when you shouldn't read it. I actually read it in like a place that most people don't read it at all. So they recommend either reading it before Throne of Glass, which is the first book, or they recommend reading it after, I think it's Crown of Midnight is when you typically read that one. I read it after Throne of Glass. And so, well, I had a lot of people on Instagram message me and they were like, "Why are you this is an odd, interesting order." And I was like, "Yeah, that was when it became available on my library app, and so that's when I'm going to take it and I'm going to listen to it." It worked out. Like most people on the internet just say read it whenever. And so if you're gonna read the series, I would just say at least you're gonna have to read Assassin's Blade at some point. At the beginning, I'd say is probably better. If I was to do it all over again, I'd probably read it after Crown of Midnight, but any time is better than no time. So, in Escaping the Epic Worlds, we've got all of the books that I've currently read from the Throne of Glass series. We've also got Uglies by Scott Westerfield, is I think his last name. So, I heard about this book when I was in middle school, and I thought about reading it, but then I wasn't sure. And then I watched the movie on Netflix and I was like, this is amazing. I was like, I've got to read this book. So immediately go onto my Libby app and I'm like, is it available? And then it was instantly available and I became obsessed with this book. This book was awesome. This is basically a YN or a YA dystopian book or dystopian world where everyone undergoes cosmetic surgery at a certain age. And so when you become 16, you become, quote, pretty when you have this cosmetic surgery. And Tally, which is the main girl, she sort of waits and she discovers the dark truth of what it actually means to be, quote, pretty. So that's all that I'm going to say for now. I loved this book. There was a lot of action in this book. There was like hurt from friendship, and so a lot of twists and turns there. I loved this book a lot, and I should probably read the rest of the series. I don't know why I didn't read the rest of the series. Probably because it wasn't available on my library app and I got busy with school, but maybe I'll end up reading the rest of the series in 2026. But I'd say this book is pretty much perfect for anyone who questions beauty standards and like social control. Also anyone who, granted it's a dystopian world, if you like things like Hunger Games and Divergent, especially if you like Divergent, you're gonna like this one. Now, I also read Onyx Storm, which is by Rebecca Yarrow, and this is the last book of the um, Fourth Wing series. And if you haven't heard about this book yet, I don't know why you haven't heard about this book yet. Basically, I say it's Hunger Games meets Dragon, or Hunger Games and Harry Potter meets Dragons. And I love this series. I wouldn't necessarily say I loved this book. I don't know what it is with me, but even when I read the Hunger Games series, I didn't like the third book. And I'm pretty sure when I read the Divergent series, I also didn't really like the third book. And when I read Harry Potter, granted I've only gotten through 4.5 of the books in that series, I didn't really like the third book either. So maybe it's just me and I just don't like the third series in many books, but I did get through the Throne of Glass series third book because that's Hairfire, and that one was awesome. It had a slow build, but it was awesome in the end. So I don't know. Maybe it's the third book in me that we just don't match very well, but it was a good tying ending to the story. I would just say I liked the first and second book way better. And then I also read Shield of Sparrows. This is kind of like a slow build romantasy where a princess is forced into a dangerous alliance with a monster hunter that she literally can't stand. And as monsters rise, the kingdom kind of demands her sacrifice, and she discovers that she's being underestimated for her like greatest power. I remember listening to this audiobook and then turning around to my friend and I was like, you have to listen to this. And she loved it too. The way that they tell the story in the audiobook form is amazing. So that's all I gotta say for that. There is like an enemies to lovers sort of thing, which I always feel like is amazing and I love so much. So if you like stuff like that, I would highly recommend Shield of Sparrows. And I think the second book in the series is coming out in March. So if you want to wait till then, or maybe just start reading the book if you're a slower reader like me, this would be the perfect time to do that. So out of the escaping into epic worlds, what my favorite book is from this entire category, I will have to say Throne of Glass is my favorite. It was just one of those things where I was listening to the audiobook and it just took me so off guard that I was like, I have to keep listening to this. And that doesn't happen quite often with me with books. So I've just got to say that was definitely going to win for my escaping into epic worlds. Now, as I'm reading Queen of Shadows, that might change a little bit, but I don't know. We'll see. And that will be a part of 2026. All right, my next categories is books that restore your romantic optimism. I always feel like you need to break up your super heavy book series or just heavy books with some sort of like romantasy book. I know some people love and hate romance books or think they're super cheesy. Yes, they are. But sometimes you just need that light fluffiness when life gets really heavy. And so that's usually when I throw in a romantasy book or a romantic book or romantic comedy, I guess. I don't know. That's what you call movies. So I think that goes with books too. Anyways, this was the year of I'm going to butcher her name, Abby Jamirez. I read all of her books except for the new one that just recently came out. My friend introduced them to me and I didn't know this, but she is known for putting like Easter eggs in a lot of her books that tie into other books that you read. So technically you can read the books that she writes as like solo books, or you can read them as a series. And so that's what I did. So it starts with Part of Your World, then Yours Truly, then Just for the Summer. So Part of Your World is a big city ER doc and a small town like good guy that fall for each other despite them living in two completely different worlds. So basically the ER doc is like, I'm too busy. Like I can't do this. This can't happen. I have to focus on work. Like I can't think about you. And so that was kind of funny to see that like give and take and pull. I will say Abby, like her sarcasm in all of her books is chef's kiss. So again, I love the romance books that have a ton of sarcasm and get that like ooh, like that is kind of like my kind of romance book. I will say Yours Truly was amazing. I loved this book. It's basically again another physician, but it's actually two physicians in this book, and one of them has extreme anxiety, but they both lack a lot of trust, and there's like this slow build of like being able to trust each other, and they start sending letters back and forth. So instead of like texting or emailing, they start just sending letters back and forth, and they're super cute. And I loved this book so much, and I would probably say it's one of my favorites out of all of Abby's books. The last one was Just for the Summer. This one was like it wasn't necessarily my favorite, but it wasn't bad either. This one was basically they had to like break a curse because they always said that they were the person that someone would date, and then when they broke up with them, then that person would go and get married or like find their forever lover. And so when she finds this guy on the internet and he's basically talking about like he is the one that this happens to him too, and there's this like whole thing with like a dog and stuff, she was like, maybe I need to message this guy. So then she starts messaging this guy, and she's a travel nurse. And so her and her friend travel everywhere, and she's debating back and forth on if she should see him and if she should try and break the curse by dating him. So this one's pretty funny. I will say it's still really great. It's just not one of my favorites out of the three. My next other romantic books, which honestly, I'm gonna feel really bad, but I don't remember these very well. Like, I had to look up the summary of these and like listen to a little bit of the audio to actually remember these books. Maybe because I just read them super early on, or just they didn't have that much of an impact on me. But I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This one is where she's a writer who's like super career driven, who basically ends up in a small town with her sister, and she just keeps running into this publisher that's her rival. And so it's kind of like big city girl and ambition then finds love is basically the premise of the book. What I remember of reading this book, it was cute and it still had its feisty back and forthness, but again, probably not one of my favorites if I can't really remember much of the book. The next one was Funny Story, also by Emily Henry. This is where Daphne, who is the main character, forces to have a breakup with her roommate, and then her ex's new girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, which is really complicated and confusing. They like they basically they break up with each other, and there's this like sweet and vulnerable moment within the book, but then she has to then basically start over and kind of like rediscover herself and find joy within herself. Again, don't really remember a ton about this book. As you can tell, is the way that I was trying to explain this book, so probably not one of my tops. Um, or maybe I just need to reread it again or listen to it again. And it was one of those like, in the moment, just bring me some joy and dopamine at this point. So, out of this entire category of books that restored my romantic optimism, I definitely say yours truly did, because it definitely also just like hit my heart, because I love writing letters and I love when people stay off their phones, and the fact that they were able to like physically write letters back and forth, I just think is so sweet. So it definitely restored my romantic optimism for sure. All right, my next category is self-development and basically becoming a doctor era. Like, we need some self-improvement era, and we need some like getting better within ourselves, because of course me, like, we've got to have some nonfiction in here. And my first one, I don't even know why I haven't read this book yet, but Atomic Habits. Like, everyone's heard of this book by this point. Like, even if you're not a reader, you've heard of this book, or at least like heard quotes from this book by James Clear. Basically, it's a proven framework that helps you build habits that are tiny daily choices, basically using systems over motivation, and using small improvements to like transform your life, is the basic summary of this book. I will say, I was listening to this book and I was like, I know most of this stuff because I basically binge listened to this on all the podcasts that I listen to and some of the YouTube videos that I watch. So it wasn't super impactful to me, but I could definitely list or like see this book being impactful, or like setting that tone if you're like trying to take action this 2026, like setting that or listening to this book or reading this book and being like, okay, how can I start viewing my life in systems and creating habits that help me meet the goals that I want, rather than just saying, oh man, I don't have motivation today, or oh man, I feel lazy, or I can't do this. It's less of you can't do this and more of what systems aren't working for you, is what I'd have to say with that. So definitely read Atomic Habits if you haven't, but also if you've been in the productivity sphere for a really long time, you probably don't have to listen to it because you've probably heard most of the things that he said in the book already. The next book that I read was Developing the Leader Within You 2.0 by John Maxwell. This book was super impactful for me. I knew leadership was important to me and I knew what it meant to be a good leader, but to have someone like break it down and actually help you understand why different leaders look different and the different levels of being a leader was helpful not only for me, but like to view other people and how to like grow myself within other spheres that I had. So for instance, like I was MPI president at Parker University, and reading this book at that time when I was president, it was really impactful for me because I was like, okay, where can I grow? How can I make improvements? How can I be better as a leader? And it showed me those gaps that I had. And I think it's either 4 or 5, where he states the 4 different types of leadership and how like everyone can be a leader. And some people say that they can't be a leader because they don't have the leadership title. So let's say like you're working at a company and then you get promoted and you're like, oh, now I need to become a leader. And he's like, no, actually, you should have been becoming a leader before you actually had the title. But most people give someone respect as a leader because they have a title, but that's only the first level. Then the second level would be because like you actually start caring about the people and you seem like you have interest in them. And then he starts going on more and more with it. So I highly recommend reading this book to anyone. Even if you don't feel like you're a leader or you don't feel like you can lead, I feel like just the self-improvement that comes along with reading this book and just being a leader for your own life is important, and this book can give you that as well. I want to start reading more of John Maxwell's books just because of the way that he writes his books and structures them. I really enjoy and I really like, and they're really um digestible but also actionable. It's not like a ton of fluff that you get from a lot of other leadership books. The next book that I read was Move Your DNA by Katie Brownman. This one, I really enjoyed reading this book. It basically broke down how like modern lifestyles limit our natural movement and what our body is designed for. She does make a lot of statements that talk about how we need more than just exercise and we don't really need exercise. And it was funny because then I started listening to her podcast because I was like, I don't know about this. But she actually had a podcast where it talked about she doesn't necessarily think exercise is wrong. Or that we don't need to do it. It's just the way that people do exercise now is just so structured and forward moving that we need to be able to move in all different ways. You need to be able to twist. You need to be able to like pick something up with a curved back. You need to be able to do daily movements within your exercise, and most people don't do that. They're just like, how can I get the biggest biceps, or how can I get the biggest chest or the biggest butt? And she comes in and saying that like, no, the reason why you have pain, weakness, and chronic dysfunction is because A, you're not moving, or B, because the exercise that you're doing is all the same and you're not applying function to what you're doing, you're just applying aesthetics to what you're doing. And so as someone who is in the field of the human body and helping people out of pain and moving better, it was really important for me to read this book, not only to be able to explain this to patients, but have a different point of view when it comes to exercise. So if you're into exercise or you're a future chiropractor or you're a movement nerd, I highly recommend reading this book because I found a lot of impact or a lot from this book. And I hope to maybe get her on my podcast one day. We'll see. If not, then maybe I'll just have to do a full breakdown of the book. We'll see. Now, the last book in this category is Don't Call It a Comeback, and I loved this book. This was more honestly a biography or an autobiography than it was like well, I wouldn't necessarily say any of these books were really self-helpy books besides the Atomic Habits, but basically she's an elite runner and she redefines the story of what like personal records and personal success means and what it means to bring real joy and identity into your life. I enjoyed this book not because I would consider myself a runner. I do run, but it's not my favorite form of exercise. I want to get back into it more, but I love weightlifting so much and I'll do sprints. I'll do sprints, I will say that. And I'll do my hikes. I'll do fast walking if that counts as a run. And with her book though, what I really enjoyed was how she is such like a type A perfectionist, and not only did you get to see her like grow as a mom, but she explained her life as when she was younger and dealing with like issues with like health and um competition as a girl and competing and what it was looking like in high school and college. And that was something that I really connected with just because of my personal background with basketball and my health. And then how she then was able to reframe that and still be like, no, just because I took a break from running doesn't mean I'm not a runner anymore. And I was actually able to then find enjoyment in running again, even though I didn't have enjoyment. But she doesn't just talk about running, she also talks about her life and becoming a mom and the struggles that it's like being a mom and having a husband and the communication that goes along with that. And she talks about the growth of that. So this will definitely be a re-listen for me because as a high achiever and a type A perfectionist, who is getting better, recovering perfectionist, I guess you could say, I will need to hear these words on repeat. So I probably need to buy this on Audible so I can listen to it when I need a little pick me up. So you can probably guess at this point which one is my favorite in the self-development slash becoming a doctor era. And it's gonna be Don't Call It a Comeback. That one is definitely my favorite just because of how much I will probably be re-listening to this over and over and over again. So don't be surprised when I do this again that it pops up in 2026. All right, my last category is this one's kind of all over the place, not gonna lie. It's quirky, clever, and mystery-ish books. But the first one I have is The Maid, and this one is a series. So you've got The Maid and then The Mystery Guest. And basically it's this maid called Molly is she's kind of socially awkward. Um, she's a hotel maid and she gets caught up in a murder mystery. And I've never really read murder mysteries before besides the Murder on the Oriental Express. That was like a long time ago. But this one was cute and different and a little bit quirky and I love it. And the mystery part of it was fun too. I will say I feel like I enjoyed The Maid a little bit more than The Mystery Guest. That one kind of lost me a little bit, but then I also don't know if it was because of that season of life that I was in and I just really wasn't paying attention to the audiobook as much as I probably should have. So the next book would be Finley Donovan is Killing It. I love this book. I read this book and it's basically about a stressed out single mom who she writes books about like murder mysteries and stuff like that. And a lady overhears her talking about her murder mystery book when she's talking to a friend and how she's like struggling with then her I think she was talking about her editor or something like that. And then this lady comes over to her and puts a note and says like, I need you to kill my husband. And she's like, wait, what? And like she needs money. So she's debating, she's like, should I do this? Should I not? And basically there's just like so much chaos and snowballs that are like coming and like twists and turns everywhere and it's super fast paced, which I really enjoy. And you get the like mix of like motherhood mayhem that goes on with all of this involved in her trying to like keep her kids out of it, but then also she needs to like take care of her kids at the same time. I know there's like other books that are within this series. I definitely need to read them, but this book I really enjoyed. My next book is Remarkably Bright Creatures. I enjoyed this book a lot. I know there's like some like love hate with this book on the internet, or at least that's what I've seen. I thought it was really cute and super heartwarming. I love the like little quirky books, and this book and The Maid I feel like are those like quirky books. There is an intelligent octopus that like they're the guy ends up having a friendship with, and I think I remember finishing this audiobook and almost crying. So, if you need a little tearjerker moment, read this book. I will say there is some like high emotion and tough conversations that if you're someone who like doesn't want to deal with like friendship and grief and stuff like that, then I probably wouldn't read this book at this time. Or like if you're in a really deep place and you're like, I just need some like happy love stuff, then like go and read yours truly and then come back to this book later. My last book in this category is Lessons in Chemistry. I really enjoyed this book. I definitely listened to this book because this book is huge. Basically, it's about this super brilliant chemist that's in the 1960s, and she's fighting against the endless sexism that is a part of their culture and her career. And she ends up then becoming this cooking show star, and she's dealing with this like give and take of like, I want to be the scientist. Like, I want to become a scientist, but yet I'm still having to be this like cooking show star, and people are finding like benefit with this, but this isn't what I want to be. So it's super inspiring and also just really sassy. The main character is extremely sassy. So if you love a sassy main character, this is definitely the book for you, and you should not let the size of the book intimidate you. So, out of this entire category, my favorite book of the quirky, clever, mystery-ish books would definitely have to be The Maid. It was just so cute, and I remember enjoying this book so much, and it brought me into this quirky, mystery-ish category of books that I didn't even think was a thing. And I found so much enjoyment in reading this book and the actual character within itself. So definitely read that one if you haven't read that one yet. I will say though, the movie that's out right now currently called The Housemaid, funny enough, I thought that was this book. And so I read The Maid thinking that it was The Housemaid and was like, okay, I'm getting ready for this movie. It's great and stuff. And then I was like, oh, wrong Maid book. It was a totally different murder mystery book. So going to be reading that in 2026. So I want to say though, I talked a lot about the books that I did read, but I didn't really talk about the books that I didn't read. There was a lot of books that I started that I didn't actually finish, or the ones where I actually started the audiobooks and I never finished them. And I want you to remember that just because someone puts like, I read 100 books, 40 books, or whatever, like they probably gave up on a lot of books. And that was something that I had to learn a lot, where it was like, it's okay to not force yourself to read a book. This is about enjoyment and keeping up a habit. So if you hate the book, stop reading the book. I wish I kept track of the ones that I stopped listening to, but honestly, I didn't because I would forget about them and there was a lot of other stuff going on. So maybe next year I'll try and remember the ones that like I didn't exactly enjoy as much or that I didn't listen to. But honestly, a lot of them were like audiobooks that I would start through the library and then it would like end the when I had to return it back and I wasn't able to renew it because like everyone wanted to read that book still. So I wasn't able to renew it and then I completely forgot about it. So there's a lot of those. Like I think I had one that had to get returned today by Arthur C. Brooks. And it was I think it's stronger by stronger, something, strength by strength, something like that. So that's my like DNF book of 2025 because I didn't finish that one and that one was in 2025. So there you go. If you needed a book that I didn't finish, there's the one for you. Now, I've talked a little bit about how like this challenge sort of like changed my life a little bit and like allowed me to change my perspective on things and like allowed me to have more of a mental escape from school. And I really do think that the imagination portion was something that I didn't realize was going to happen. And I want to work on that muscle more and more, especially when we're in a day and age where like AI is such a huge thing and creativity I feel like is getting lost more and more, and your ability to like think for yourself or think about things differently or create worlds for yourself or create different situations is becoming lost because you can just outreach those answers, and being able to use that muscle of creativity to build a different world is so important. And you can do that by just starting to read. And so when I get into these books, like reading the rest of the series of the Throne of Glass series, really challenging myself to like picture it in my mind. What does this look like? And that would actually probably help me retain the story more than I ever did before. And I kind of mentioned this where like I struggled a little bit, or actually not a little bit, a lot with reading growing up. And I never really understood why people enjoyed reading, and I always had a hard time with retention with reading. And I think this is one of those reasons, is because I read it for the words that were there. And I was just trying to get through the book and I was just trying to finish the book. But I never actually really enjoyed the book and allowed myself to create a world and have fun with it. So if you're one of those people who like don't enjoy reading, or you're trying to get into a reading habit and you have 5 million Instagram accounts that you're following with like different recommendations, or you have piles of books that you said you're going to read, but it was mostly just because the cover page was really pretty, you might just need to grab one of those books and start imagining more than just reading. So I will definitely be doing more reading in 2026. I want to challenge myself to get to 25 books next year. So I'm still going to do the hashtag Becca Babbles reads challenge. So if you are going to read or have a reading goal for yourself, I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear what books you're going to read. For me, I'm definitely going to read the rest of the Throne of Glass series. I may read the um the Hunger Games book that is, what is his name? I completely blanked on his name. Well, at least I have the note here. Sunrise on the Reaping. I may actually reread that one or read it for the first time, depending. I'll start reading it and I'll maybe remember. And then I'll read the Housemaids series. I actually got it for Christmas. It's sitting over there on my shelf. So I will definitely be reading that as well. So then I can watch the movie. And then I will be reading the second book to Shield of Sparrow, and it's called The Rights of Starling. I want to read that one too. And then for my nonfiction book, I'll be reading Forever Strong by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I've been meaning to read this book, and then I just keep forgetting about it. And then I've also heard about these two books recently, the Red Rising series and the Ascended series. So, well, or I don't think that one's a series, but I've heard about that series and that book. So those are kind of my plans of what I'm going to read next year. Well, actually, technically, it's this year, because when I'm recording this podcast, it is January 1st of 2026. So I would love to hear what you're going to read and how many books you're going to read, and use the hashtag Becca Babbles reads so I can keep up to date on everything that you guys are reading. But with all that being said, I hope you guys had a great 2025 with whatever books that you read. And I can't wait to see what you start reading in 2026. So with all that being said, I can't wait to babble with you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Becca Babbles podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing that you can do is leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or any other listening platform of your choosing. If you want to learn more about me, you can do that by following me on Instagram at Becca and Wellness, or by checking out my blog, freebies, offers, and newsletter on my website at beccaandwellness.com. If you want to share the love of the podcast, you can do that by taking a screenshot and sharing it on social media and tagging me and the podcast at Becca and Wellness and using the hashtag Becca Babbles Podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to babble with you next time.